How do we integrate our longing for spiritual depth with the ache we might feel for justice in our communities? Hi, friends. I'm Jem Fadling, and this is the Unhurried Living podcast, where we inspire you to rest deeper, live fuller, and lead better. If you've ever felt unsure of how your personal faith connects with the pain of the world, or if you've ever thought, I want to act, but I don't know where to begin, well, today's conversation is for you. And it's not about politics or performance. It's about spiritual formation that moves us closer to the heart of Christ and closer to people. Today, we're stepping into a tender and transformative conversation at the intersection of Christian spiritual formation and justice, especially racial justice. Many of us long for a faith that's not just personal, but also healing and redemptive in the world. We pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But what does that look like when it comes to loving our neighbor in tangible, just, and Christ-modeled ways? My guest today, Brenda Renderos, is someone who cares very much about this question. She's a transformation life coach, a ministry leader, and speaker who has spent years walking with people on their journey toward greater wholeness. With a background in Christian studies and soul care, Brenda brings both a grounded faith and a wide open heart to her work. She partners with people seeking greater life balance and holistic health, and today she's helping us explore how that same transformation can shape the way we engage justice as followers of Jesus. So as you listen, I invite you to pause, breathe, and open your heart. This is not about guilt or shame. It's about listening, learning, and asking the Spirit, what is one step forward I can take? Let's begin. Well, Brenda Renderos, hello and welcome to the Unhurried Living podcast. Thank you for being here.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Brenda's on our team, and we've just had a long-standing relationship of many layers, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
But Brenda is just a beautiful soul, and I'm so happy to have you here to have this conversation today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, it's really good and really important. So we're just going to dive right in. So
Let's do it.
I like to start kind of personally very often because we can talk about things, but one's own journey matters a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so can we start there? What has been your journey? How did you come to do your own work here at the intersection of Christian spiritual formation and justice?
Yeah. Man, that's a question with a lot of layers to it. So just to jump right into it, for me, it really started to open up in 2020, which I know is a time period that there's probably a lot of, what do they call it? Trauma bonding that's happened because of everything that's going on. You know, we had COVID. There was a lot of political unrest and racial tension, and there were hate crimes, and there was protesting and rioting, and there was like all these things, right? And I was just really trying to navigate all of that, process everything that was happening. We as a family were trying to navigate and process a lot of that. So in the midst of all of that, we went to eat like a couple blocks up the street from our home, and the place we've gone to so many times and we still go to. And we're just sitting outside eating. It was outdoor eating. We're sitting outside, and these guys show up. They pull up in this big beautiful truck, very patriotic, all of flags and everything. And there's like 3 or 4 guys that pulled up, and they sit down at their table. And I noticed that they kept like looking over at our family as we were eating. And I picked up on it. But it's something that I've been accustomed to, where people will look at us. And sometimes it's, maybe they've recognized us. Maybe they're trying to kind of figure out like what we are. That's a question that comes up quite often. I am multi-ethnic. I'm mixed Black and Mexican. My husband is Salvadorian. So now our kids are also very mixed. And so, it happens. So I'm just like, oh, maybe it's not a thing. My body was feeling something different, but I tried to put that out of mind, focusing on just us, our family eating. We got up and we finished eating. We walked away. And then these guys are now like, their eyes are locked in on us to the extent one of them literally turns his body and just staring us down. And again, my body is feeling this is not okay. But my mind is telling me, trying to rationalize, it could be anything. Don't think the worst. It could be this, it could be that. So in a way, I guess, trying to regulate my emotions. And we leave. The following day, I'm having a conversation with our youngest at the time. And he was just asking about, why did those guys have to keep saying that word? I'm like, what guys were you talking about? And basically he was saying that the guys that were at that table, they kept using the N word and they kept saying it over and over and over again. And then it seemed like they were just trying to instigate something. Like, I didn't hear that. And I know my husband didn't hear that. I'm like, why didn't you say anything? And his response was that he thought we had heard and that we were just trying to keep the peace. So later we got a family meeting where we had our two older kids that were there, and they're young adults at this point. And so we just asked them, hey, what did you experience? What happened? And they're like, oh yeah, we heard them saying it over and over. And you could totally tell that they were saying this, trying to instigate something. Again, I'm asking the question, why didn't you say anything? Well, because, Mom, this is normal. This happens. You just deal with it. These were all the things that were coming out. And we thought you guys were just wanting to keep the peace. And in that conversation, I felt something like, Jem, it was literally like in my chest area, like that area where it felt like something just broke. And it still brings emotion to me. I just felt so broken in that moment because I started to think about so much of like, how is it that we have raised our family to think that you just swallow this? And that we wouldn't even talk about it afterwards to see how are you guys doing? Like, these are traumatic experiences, like that this is just what you do. Mind you, we're not a muted type of a family. We advocate, we do a lot of things when it comes to helping those in need, which I'm going to talk about, breaking down that term a little bit more. But for some reason, this part of our Image Day, of like who we are, it's like ethnicity wise and how that was being attacked, that you don't address. And so for me, that really broke something in me. When that happens to me in anything, I go into discovery mode. I need to learn. So I automatically look towards the church. Help me with this. And I started to reach out and express the pain that we were in, what we were going through. I know we're not the only ones. Where can we get help? And I was met with two different, general camps. There was either the one camp of like, yeah, we totally recognize there's gaps in our teaching and what we're doing, but we don't really know what to do. Can you help us? Right. And so trying to be able to help, but knowing we had our own pain that we were navigating. The other camp was being defensive, where instead of really hearing the person who was hurting, making it about them. So I couldn't find any space within the church. Finally found a particular place where their fellowship was really embracing a lot of this kind of conversation. There was a lot of healing, a lot of like not feeding into anger, but equipping. We got connected with what is now called the Center for Restorative Justice. We did all these table talks and educating, went on a civil rights pilgrimage, lots of healing and learning and encouraging. And that really set a foundation for me that my life has just not been the same since then. But that incident of seeing my kids respond in a way of you just swallow it and take it, it just broke me. And I know that there's got to be a different way. So that was really my catalyst towards all of this.
Oh my goodness. So visceral. And it's kind of shocking that you could feel it and sense it, but you didn't hear it, but they did. It must have, were they sitting closer?
They were sitting closer. So yeah, they were all on one end of the table. We were over here. And honestly, as I think about that, because remember, like I said, my body was feeling so, but my mind kept pushing it down. Right. And that comes from a lot of different spaces, because a lot of times we feel something is off. We cannot prove it, but we can feel it. But often we're put in positions where we have to prove it. So your mind takes over, and what you're feeling doesn't necessarily count. And so I think what happened is I had just trained myself to go into that mode. And then you don't want to, you don't want to ruffle feathers. You don't want to cause division. You don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. And so for me, I had just learned you just stuff it down. You just stuff it down. By me pushing down what my body was telling me, I feel like I was also closing my ears and my eyes at the same time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, you're touching on something that I think is important, especially, I mean, this is 5 years ago you're talking about, but even still now, and even more so, maybe this idea that is there such a thing as a reasonable conversation where people, because you just described two kinds of people, one who just didn't want to take the time and the other one that was like, well, this is not me, this, the defensive. I mean, is there a way in which we can learn to just have a conversation? I wonder if people, for their own reasons, don't feel safe even in this arena.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's such a fear of either saying the wrong thing or, doing something wrong. The discomfort, you can feel really uncomfortable. We don't know. It's really challenging for us to be in spaces where we feel uncomfortable. I know a lot of the journey within spiritual formation is humility and allowing ourselves to feel uncomfortable. And if we could do more work in that area, I think we could engage in some of these conversations. And so that is really why I was excited about having this conversation, because my journey really started with some heart work that needed to happen first. Because although I am a multi-ethnic person, I feel like for the majority of my life, I had lived my life on survival mode. What can I do just to take care of me and my family and make sure we're okay, make sure that we're knowing how to assimilate and do all of these things, opposed to understanding there's a broader conversation to have. And I know for me personally, it's in this area of racial reconciliation, but the conversation of social justice it's very broad. So when I say that, I'm talking about all the things, not just this there. This was just my personal experience.
Yeah. Yeah. We already mentioned this before we pressed record here, that we're barely scratching the surface of anything we're saying today. There is a process here that I think you're uncovering. And, our Bishop Todd Hunter, who was our pastor for a while, and he's the bishop over our diocese of Churches for the Sake of Others. But he also has another organization called the Center for Formation, Justice, and Peace. And I heard that he was very intentional about the order, because he said it starts with your own spiritual formation. And from that naturally will emerge an inclination toward justice. And then the work of justice leads to peace. And so it was very intentional. Do you resonate with that process?
100%. 100%. I think it's important to understand that spiritual formation and justice, they're not separate journeys. They are just two sides of the same coin. And so if we can remember that I think it'd be really helpful. The deeper that we go in relationship with God, the more that we reflect his heart. I think we would all agree with that, right? But then when you look through scripture, you'll see that God's heart is undeniably for justice. What's interesting is how infrequently we use that kind of language within our teachings of church. You don't hear justice, social justice, that kind of thing very often. But his heart was very much for that. And so, I would definitely say that there are two sides to the same coin, in that transformation isn't just about our personal holiness. And I've heard you talk about this as well. It's not just about my personal holiness, but it's about becoming people who love and serve and advocate for people the way that Jesus did. And man, the examples of how Jesus did that in scripture, there's this, when you think about, we talk about helping those in need, because this was part of like my processing when I was like looking back, like, man, Lord, like I was helping people who were in need. But then I had to ask the question, okay, well, how are you defining helping those in need? That's the language that we use traditionally in most churches, right? Who gets into the those and what gets into the needs, right? And it generally has been like, well, I've led teams overseas on mission trips. I've gone to outreaches. I've done this. And those, oh my goodness, don't stop doing that. We do all of that. Show up for the widow and the orphan and all of those things. But it's broader than that. And Jesus, he challenged broken systems. Look at where who he would dine with. When we talk about the Samaritan, there was an ethnic component to that. When we talk about the woman at the well, it wasn't just that he knew all the things with her. He was challenging some gender things that were going on. So there were these things that were just coinciding that, that were there. So if we talk about the coin, the one side of the coin would be that inner transformation fuels a justice. And the other side of the coin would be how justice impacts our transformation. So we take the first side of the coin. Inner transformation fuels justice. The prophets were constantly calling out those who were ignoring justice, right? And Jesus rebuked those who would just tithe religiously, but they were neglecting justice, mercy, faithfulness, all those things, right? So our spiritual formation, it needs to make us more Christ-like. That if we're truly being transformed by God, it's going to impact the way that we see and we treat other people. The other side of the coin is how justice shapes our inner transformation. When you're engaging in social justice, you're putting yourself into some really hard places, right? Whether that you're talking about racial injustice, you could be talking about advocating for the poor, challenging those broken systems. I have friends who are like on the front lines working towards stopping sex trafficking, child trafficking. There are those that are working within the educational system and the work that they're doing. There are those that are looking for more access for people who are struggling with physical disabilities or mental health issues. Like there's so much that's going on. And so you're in these hard places. And when you're in those hard places, you have to confront your own biases and your own, however you feel uncomfortable. And those spaces, they stretch our faith. And that becomes an invitation to deepen our reliance in God. So you see how getting ourselves into these spaces can really connect us to having hearts that are even more transformed by God. So it requires humility, perseverance, a willingness to be uncomfortable. And I think all of those are a part of our spiritual growth.
For sure. And I can see the intertwining that you're talking about. One leads to the other. This kind of circular motion of I grow and then I care more and I help more and I see more. And then that shapes me. So it's this beautiful organic. And, you can't go an episode of Unhurried Living podcast without hearing me talk about John 15. But that's because I just think that image is so central to everything. I mean, we always talk about the fruit that emerges. Usually we're talking about it in the context of leadership and ministry.
Yeah.
But I think it's any good that God produces from within your life is that much fruit that will last. Right. So the work that you're doing to help those that need to be seen, need to be helped is also part of that good fruit that would be born, don't you think?
Exactly. It's, like I said, when I realized that because of my own context, I had gotten into a mode of a survival mode. How do I just make sure that my family's okay? And then these other areas that I was helping in, I don't want to say that it didn't challenge me, that I wasn't ever uncomfortable. It's always hard to see someone who is suffering, who is hurting and whatnot. But I had a different threshold for that. This was the area that was going to be the more challenging area for me to be able to do some kind of work within this area. And I think for each person, that's going to look differently. For some people, going to a different country and being out in a province somewhere or working at an orphanage, that's that the threshold for them it's harder for them in that context. Each one is going to be different, but there is something about putting ourselves in these hard places that God just does this refining work within our hearts. And we have an opportunity to just let him pour out even more of what his intent is for us.
Yeah. I think too, it's, I've come back to the great commandment of loving God and also loving my neighbor as I love myself. And sometimes I think it's easier for us to say, well, I went to Mexico, I went to Africa, I did whatever, I built a house or worked at an orphanage, because that's this thing that you did. And there it was, and it was safely over there. But love your neighbor. I mean, all of us live in a house or an apartment in some version of a city or a community, we don't have to actually, you don't have to look very far to actually, right? So, and I think that's the scary part too. It's like, what do I do right here? It's like, but you could even start, I think Mother Teresa would just say, she always said, love the person in front of you.
Yeah.
So even a part of this journey is just become a person who's open to sharing your life with those who are actually already there.
Yeah. Oh
Don't
my goodness. Girl, yes. What's crazy is that I have experience where there have been those where, they go on different trips. Like you say, they leave the country, they go to different places. And then when they come back, the people that are here that look very similar to the people that they flew thousands of miles away to help.
Yeah.
People here maybe either look similar or similar situations, maybe the way they treat them when they come back home is very different. Somehow there's like a disconnect that happens. And not saying all the time. There are those times that it can happen, And for me, having it closer to home did take a certain amount of courage for me, because what I also recognize is that even within my closest community, I never really would share with them the things that I would experience. The fact that it was not an uncommon thing for me to get stared at the way that I was getting stared at. I wouldn't talk to people about that, because I didn't want to have to, defend it, or I didn't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. It was always about for everyone else, but never. So when I did start sharing, hey, here are some of my stories, there was this shock of like, really? There was something about it being closer to home that required a lot more vulnerability for me to do that.
Yeah, makes so much sense. Well, as we mentioned, we're barely scratching the surface of this. And I want to pause for a moment too and just say, I don't want any part of our conversation to sound like we're pointing our fingers at anyone. If anything, we're trying to come alongside ourselves and anyone who's listening or watching, and just say, let's become aware of some things. Let's start noticing the people around us. Yeah. There can be even a kind of simplicity here, maybe, of just open with curiosity, with the heart of Jesus. You're making your way through your day. You're going to work. You're going to the store. Maybe you're going to school. Wherever you're going.
Yeah.
There's people.
Yes.
You could even just start by noticing and caring about the people that are crossing your path on any given day. And that can blossom and become more over time if you wanted it to.
Absolutely. 100%. I think that has been the posture of my heart of how can this be an invitational type of a conversation? Because I know it's hard and it's uncomfortable, but we're in this together. And I think this is the heart of God for us to stand in the gap for those who are in need.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so grateful, Brenda, that you're sharing a personal story about what happened to you in a restaurant. You've shared with me other stories about what has happened, things that might have happened to your son that I'm completely unaware, because no one ever tells me these things, and none of those things have ever happened to our family. And so I'm glad you're talking about it, because I don't know other people's experience.
Right.
I wasn't right. So we have to hear.
Exactly. Yeah. No, exactly.
Well, most of our listeners are fairly deeply formed in their faith. The people who are listening are some version of a leader, probably at least interested in spiritual formation or whatever unhurried living means. But justice work might sound overwhelming, maybe political in a way they're uncomfortable with, or maybe even intimidating. So if that's the case, what are some ways we can begin engaging at the heart level? You've talked about this a little bit, but maybe more heart level, before feeling like we need to jump into something we're not quite even sure what that is, or maybe we're not ready for it.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I am really fortunate that my journey, the way that it was to shepherd, was starting at that heart level. When my husband and I went on the Southern Civil Rights pilgrimage, it was intense. so because you're physically in these spaces, you're talking to people that you're reading about in history books, because this is not history that's very far from us. And for a lot of us, our response was like, when we get back, what do we do? What do we do? And the guidance that was given to us is don't do anything right away. You need to take some time to sit with this, to unpack it, to grieve, to lament. And they had a spiritual director that was on the journey with us. And at the end of every day, held space with us and helping us to process this. And so I was very fortunate in being able to have that experience. And so some of the things that, I've learned from that, I understand where it can be really just like overwhelming. It can feel, especially in today's climate, it can feel really political, it can feel divisive. And you don't know where to start. I know for me, it still can feel really overwhelming. What is my voice in this? What do I do? Right. So here's something to remember. At its core, social justice is not about politics. And I know that immediately there would be those who might want to argue with me, but just hear me out. Just hear me out. Politics does play a huge role, has a massive impact. Policy does matter. I get that. Policies don't change people. And so at its core, justice is really about love. So if we can start to maybe wrap our head around some of that, wrap our heart around that, it's about aligning our hearts with God's heart for people. And that all is going to begin internally. So I would say one of the most important first steps would be to ask yourself, what is shaping my view of justice? Is this coming through a lens of like a cultural lens, through a political lens, or through a biblical lens? And a great way to begin that conversation is to sit with some scripture and read those different passages. I have a few that I think we can maybe include in some of the notes that are there, but Isaiah 1:17 and Micah 6:8, Luke chapter 4, verse 18 to 19. Pick a passage, sit with that, and ask yourself, what does God say about justice here? And what does this reveal about his heart? And then what is the invitation for me in this time, in this moment? I do believe that God sees the different stages of our life. I believe that he is aware of our varying capacities and our whatever our limitations may be. That's not like a negative thing. We just need to know, like, what are my capacities? So asking the question, what does God say about justice here? What does this reveal about God? And what's the invitation for me right now? And being able to start making sure that we're being formed, biblically speaking, opposed to maybe just the world. Interesting little side story with this. I've had lots of conversations, since 2020 around this, and there was a pastor who was asking me a question about if I felt that there was some secularism seeping into the church around this particular topic. So not just social justice, like as a broad spectrum, but this particular topic of racial reconciliation. And the concern is there were some younger pastors and they were wanting to do some things. And while that was good, just, wondering where they were getting their influence from and all of that. And so my response to him was, yeah, probably, but I'm not surprised. And he was surprised by that response. And my response to that was like, well, what would we expect? Is we haven't talked about it a lot in the church. We don't have these kinds of conversations. And people are experiencing this real time. And, people are seeing this happening. And there's a burden that God's putting on their heart for this. And if the church isn't having those conversations, then of course they're going to go to where they are having the conversation. So I'm not quite ready to throw any shade on them for what maybe what could be happening. I get the warning. I'm also looking at my ownership in this as an older generation, that we should be having there's room for more conversation to be had here. And so if we really want to make sure that we have a biblical foundation in this, we need to take some time and just sit with scripture and ask these questions. Another heart level response that we can give is, before we jump into activism, take some time to hear the stories of people who've experienced this firsthand, just exactly like what you were saying, Jem. Yeah. Read books, listen to sermons if you find those who are incorporating this language into their teaching. listen to podcasts like what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
Look for those Christian leaders, like the pastor that you were talking about, they're engaging in justice work. Like, do those things. I really would want to encourage people. Although the reading of the books and all of that is great, there's still some distance that is there. Try to figure out how you can get into some more proximity, the physical space with someone who has actually gone through this firsthand. You can't beat that. You can't beat that. So, I would encourage, listen with humility. And when we start to feel a leaning towards, I need to fix this, or feeling defensive, lean into curiosity. Those are the two most common responses when we hear something that is an injustice. We are uncomfortable. You've ever heard someone, and I've said it myself, it pains me to see you hurting, right?
Right.
I think we've all said that.
Yeah. Yep.
What I'm expressing is that your pain is also making me feel uncomfortable. I want to fix this so that we're both okay, right? Lean into curiosity to ask, like, more about that pain. What could a help be in that? When we start to feel defensive, here's how defensiveness can start to look. Listing all the ways, all the good things that you've done. I'm not a bad person, but no one's saying that. So just lean into curiosity and ask those questions, whenever that were to come up. So sit with people. And also just keep in mind that, sometimes we hinder ourselves from engaging in this because we're afraid that we're going to say the wrong thing or that we're going to get it wrong. But just remember that transformation doesn't happen all at once. You've talked to me so much about the critical journey, and that's a lifetime span, right? We never just finally arrive. So just know that it's a process, and just ask God, where's my starting point?
Right.
Don't compare it to anybody else's. This is my starting point, and you start there. Justice work is not about doing everything. It's about stepping into something. And that can just really help take some of the weight off of our shoulders.
Yeah, for sure. I love, as always, how much grace there is here. We can engage this conversation starting from right where we actually are, right? And just open to what might be next for us wherever we find ourselves along this journey.
Yeah.
So I know that this work, as you just said, you brought up the critical journey, the long journey that we're taking through life, but also if you're involved in any kind of justice work, it is also hard and slow and sometimes discouraging because you won't always see the fullness of the fruit of whatever's going on, maybe in your lifetime. I mean, certainly Martin Luther King never saw the fullness of what he was hoping for. I'm in the midst right now of, I've mentioned this before on a previous episode, that I was adopted at birth, and turns out I'm half Japanese, which I only found out in a recent years. I'm more, let's say I'm more Japanese than I thought I was. Let's put it that way. And my new bio dad, who I've made connection with in this whole story, has been digging around for me, trying to get information on my bio mom. I call them bio mom, bio dad, because they're the ones that gave birth, but I have parents who raised me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
My bio mom has since passed away, but she was the one that was Japanese, 100% Japanese. And I'm going to see him coming up this summer, but he's been giving me little snippets of stories about how traumatic and dramatic the whites and the Japanese were. Their story, because I was born in 1964. So this is only 18 years after the internment camps. The Japanese internment camps. So for 18 years ago, for us, this is 2025. That would have been 2007. So just think, in 2007, what if there were people who were corralled up from all around the United States, like one race, and thrown into these things? So it makes so much sense. So he said when even they were trying to date, there was just so much pushback and so much pressure that they couldn't sustain a relationship. And he didn't think that way at the time, because to him, she was just this beautiful woman that he liked, right? Or loved. But the pressure was coming from all these different directions. And
wow.
Anyway, I'm looking forward to digging more into just learning about my own sort of biological past. And I've told him specifically that when I go visit him this summer, that I just want to hear especially about what it was like socially, politically back then. What did it feel like? What did it feel like to have that tension where you were not supposed to date a Japanese person?
Right.
It's so, I guess I'm sharing this only because I'm wanting to just learn from someone who was there. I know I'm 61. This is a long time ago, but there's still echoes of things, and it's a part of my own birth story. I was born in a time when it was contentious and tumultuous, and difficult. So my bio mom would have had a really hard time because she was the one that had to carry me. And her family knew that it was a white guy, and that was all of that was it was all unacceptable, all of it from both sides.
Oh my goodness.
So anyway, just to say, there are human beings. There are human beings here. There are people living actual lives, and so I think when we talk about justice, because I have to confess, even though I'm half Japanese, I've lived what I would call a white life. Just because I married a white guy, all my kids look white. I mean, I didn't even know I was half Japanese. Most people didn't know. I'm just saying, so then what happens to me is I end up being one of those people who's overwhelmed by the whole topic because I don't even know how I would take one step in any direction.
Right.
What I hear you saying, and where I think I find myself, is to bring all of that back down, just bring it right back down to here. What we're talking about is people, humans.
Right.
We're talking about my own heart, which I can connect with God in, and allow goodness to come forth toward other people. So if we take it out of the political sphere or the social sphere or whatever the conversation is supposed to be, bring it right here. There are human beings that I could listen to. There are human beings that I could talk to. I just shared a tiny bit of my own story about in my past, I have this very contentious part in my very beginnings that I wasn't even aware of.
Right.
But it mattered to them. It was hard for them, right? I can listen to that. So I think I'm just trying to say for all of us, what could it hurt to just listen to someone, ask a question? What was this like for you?
Yes.
Right? Isn't that what you're kind of saying?
100%. And it helps us to practice. I don't know if this is a spiritual discipline or not. I feel like maybe it should be being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We can, in our transformation journey, be driven more from comfort. So I'm trying to achieve something. So the more that I achieve something, then the more comfort I'm going to feel, the more protected I'm going to feel because I'm getting all the right things, right? And so, but what if it was about stepping into more discomfort? The goal, the carrot isn't comfort. It's our ability to engage what is uncomfortable. Right. Everything that you see Jesus doing, I don't know if it was necessarily uncomfortable maybe for him. It was uncomfortable for everybody else around him because there was always some kind of commentary going on, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like this invitation to normalize this, to engage this. And what you're talking about, you kept saying that word, people. I think it's we to humanize these things.
Yes.
To not be so quick with the healing of the past that we forget the past. There's something to remember. You look in the Old Testament and how God was constantly saying to set up these altars of remembrance. I feel like there's still this invitation for us to do that, to remember the things that God has brought us through, to remember the pain of our ancestors, the pain of people before. It softens our heart. It reminds us that we have to lean into God. So then when I'm interacting with maybe someone else in a different struggle, and it's not anything to do with racial rickets, it has to do with maybe a physical disability or something. Right. Instead of me getting defensive that I wasn't thoughtful in a certain way, it's more, my heart is actually soft in awareness of, oh my goodness, I'm so caught up in okay, here's a really simple one. I have a friend who's left-handed. This is almost embarrassing to think about this, but she was breaking it down to me how hard, like in school, because the desks are all for right-handed people. So like, what this looks like and all that, and like where they tend to want to sit at the table because they're left-handed. And I remember thinking, I am so in my right-handed majority world that I never once thought about what it's like to be left-handed. No, there was nothing, it was not an issue, right? And it wasn't, that's just a very lighthearted example of, instead of feeling defensive about it, my heart's soft enough to recognize where my blind spots are and to say, I want to learn. So now I've learned, and how can I be more thoughtful towards my left-handed brothers and sisters in the world and offer up a different seat, like that's an example, like to see people, just to see people. And in order to do that, we got to hear their stories.
Right. That's true. And this is just good general counsel anyway, on any topic.
Yes.
It's just because we're in the information age. We've got machines all around us all the time, and we're being taken over by AI anyway, right? Ha ha ha.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just saying it's more important than ever to just humanize everything. We are all just people making our way. Whenever I go somewhere, like I like to travel. So when you're making your way through an airport, I know you've been a lot of places too, or if you go to another country or another city, sometimes I just like to look out wherever I am and just see all the people. If you're in a parking lot and all these people are driving around, or they're in the stores, and you go, every one of these people has a web of a life.
Oh yeah.
Right? Relationships and issues at work or with their kids or with their spouse or so. And I get so wrapped up just in me, but every person that you see has an intricate web of a life.
Right.
And we could be interested, even just for a fraction of a moment, at the checkout line in someone, and treat people like humans. So
now imagine if we, well, I was going to say, imagine if we incorporated that kind of language into our like spiritual formation type of teaching, where, and at the beginning, like I said, I think we need to keep those ministries in play of like outreaches and, going overseas and, helping those who are hungry or houseless, like absolutely keep that. But what if we could broaden that? Because in a way, we're not necessarily saying that these things don't count, but by not ever referring to them, we can kind of nurture this frame of mind of that this is what helping those in need is. And anything else outside of that, that's for activism. That's outside of this. Instead of being able to say, no, this is all of it. And thank God for the body of Christ, because not all of us can be in all the things, but those who have a burden on their heart for those in financial need or home, like do that. Those who are advocating it for the school systems, that's part of this too. It's not an extra, it's not an outside thing. Those doing work in racial reconciliation, that counts too. And then as things start to show up in real time in our society, bringing that reminder of whether this person is following Christ or not, this person was created in the image of God. And we have a responsibility to that. Let's look to Jesus and how did he respond? If we could have more of that encouragement, I think that could just set a really good foundation for us to have conversations.
Well, I wonder if maybe you just answered the question I was going to ask. I'll ask it anyway and see if there's anything else you want to add to it. I was just going to say, to sort of wrap us up, is there any more encouragement that you want to offer to someone who maybe wants to, well, we were going to talk about long term, but what I hear you saying is bring it in, don't even think about how long this is going to take. Just bring it right here. What would you say to someone right now? They're listening to this and now they're walking away from either watching or listening.
Yeah.
What do they do?
Yeah. Sit with those questions about, like, when you're thinking about social justice and it feels overwhelming, take a few steps back and ask the question as to what formed your understanding of social justice. What is I love asking people when they say a particular term, when you say, and then fill in the blank, what does that mean to you? Because social justice means maybe one thing. People are defining it different ways. We have all this terminology that's getting thrown out. But it's fascinating to understand what is everyone's individual understanding of that. So before trying to figure out how to go out, just take a moment to sit, ask yourself the question, when I hear social justice, what does that mean to me? How did I come to that conclusion? Sit with the scriptures, do the heart work. And then the other I would say is find some other people who are doing this kind of work. Discover what is the thing that God is putting a burden on your heart for.
Yeah.
Release yourself from that you have to be in all the things. You don't have to do everything. Just step into something. And then look for those who are doing this work and find that encouragement within your community. And one thing I was really particular about is that I wasn't looking for a community that was just going to get me riled up and angry, because that steals energy from me. I'm looking for a community that we are going to keep ourselves centered in Christ, that we are going to be activated, we're going to get educated, that we're going to be encouraging. This is not going to be a competition, and that there's a righteous indignation, but there's love in that. And what does that look like? So find some people that are going to help you to be able to stay centered and are going to be encouraging you. And this is my favorite one. Just do the next thing in front of you. Just do the next thing. You were talking about going to the grocery store. If you notice that someone's being treated a certain way, or maybe something was said, ask God, what do I do in this situation? And just do that next thing. How am I raising my kids? Do that next thing. How am I there for my friend that I just saw something being done that was like, she was being put down because she's a woman in leadership? Let me go talk to her and ask her, how can I come alongside you? Instead of trying to fix it automatically, let me just talk to her. Like, just do the next thing in front of you. And all of that counts. Every conversation, every prayer, every time you sit and you have coffee and you hold space and you're willing to hear that person's story and ask the questions and engage in that, like, all of that matters. That, my biggest challenge has been, I have friends who have these nonprofits. They're doing amazing work. And I was thinking, I got to do that. And it always feels like I'm just so small compared to what it is that they're doing, right? But that's not what God's put the burden on my heart to do. What He's telling me is every morning, Brenda just asked me, what is my will for you today? And just do that next thing. And if my heart is being transformed in this way, it's going to pour out.
I love that you're basically saying you don't have to necessarily start a program or join a program. You could literally just have a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could connect with another human that you actually saw something happen to or around. Just talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful
live the life.
Yes. Yes. So good. Well, Brenda has thrown out a lot of verses and a lot of questions, and we've already agreed that we're going to put these things. If you're listening to the podcast, they'll be in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, you can just check the description box and we'll put the scriptures and the questions down there so that you can spend some good time with those. I'm wondering, Brenda, before we go, how could people find you online? Maybe people have some questions and they'd love to connect. You are a transformation life coach.
Yes.
And so, and you love to have these conversations anyway. So how could people connect with you online?
Yeah, well, my website is brendarenderos.com. So you can visit me there. I'm also on the Unhurried Living, the soul care guide. So you can find me over there as well. I'm on Instagram at Brenda Renderos. And I absolutely welcome having these kinds of conversations, whether you're someone that you've been in the work and maybe you're growing weary and you just need some space to be able to breathe and to replenish, or you're just starting out. This stirred something within you. You do have more questions and you're looking for a space where you're wanting to be brave, but also feel safe enough to ask the questions. I absolutely love those conversations. Love them, because I want a safe space for people to be able to say the things, ask the questions, and let's learn and grow together.
Well, let me put my exclamation point on that. I want you guys to know that there isn't a person that I trust more than Brenda specifically in this conversation. You can talk about anything. She's a beautiful coach. She's a beautiful soul. She's wise. She's caring. But especially if you want to have a further conversation about what we've been talking about today, there isn't anyone I trust more for you with your soul to go and connect with her soul. So feel free to make that leap. And I just want to thank you so much, Brenda, again, for your heart and for having this conversation with us.
Jim, thank you so much. You're such a dear friend. So just having this conversation, I feel like we should have had like our coffee and been on the back porch or something that.
All I had was my water here. That's so boring.
Thank you so much. It's just such a joy to always be able to have time with you.
Thank you for joining me on the Unhurried Living podcast. You can download free resources and learn more about us at unhurriedliving.com. And please subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. We'd also like to thank our partner, Life Audio. Check out their other faith-centered podcasts at lifeaudio.com. Blessings to you as you make your way.